All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. This channel is about educational matters that are probably unknown, things I think are important subjects, but they have not been given any real public acknowledgement. Um, Usually, things that are very far out on the fringes, but should be far more central to our attention. And today is the 158th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory. And this is a system of theory, theory of everything that was proposed by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. He died back in 1990, started his work many, many years before that, way back in 1930 or so, and wrote up his fundamental postulates in the 1950s, and then started writing books. His postulates basically state that we do not live in a universe of matter, and we do not live in a universe of energy, but we live in a universe of motion. And motion is the most fundamental thing. And motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are basically components of the two components of motion, and everything is made out of them. So space is normally thought of as really, and time too, is normally thought of as the container of the universe. But in Larson's vision, space and time are the contents of the universe. Even though space and time do not exist independently, they only exist together in motion. Motion is basically a fraction with time or space as the numerator and with space or time as the denominator. And therefore, space and time have a reciprocal relationship. They are identical to one another, except that they are, counterparts in that fraction that makes up motion. Now, they both have multiple dimensions, 3 or more dimensions, their coordinate aspects. We know space to have 3 or more dimensions, coordinate space, x, y, z coordinates. Time also has that as a natural outcome of the reciprocal system. We know time to be progressing, getting later and later always. Larson calls that clock time. And therefore, there is also something that is called clock space. Clock space is, whereas clock time is everything is always getting later and later, with clock space, everything is always getting farther and farther apart. And this was observed by the Hubble telescope even before Larson's, first findings back in the 1920s, that all of the galaxies, all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. This clock time and clock space is what Larson calls a scalar motion. It is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no particular direction. Or you could say all directions. And you can visualize this scalar motion by taking out a balloon and a magic marker and putting a bunch of dots on the balloon. When you blow up the balloon, all of the dots are moving away from each other. That is a scalar motion. The dots are moving away from each other, but in no particular direction. And then also, space and time also come in only discrete units. There is a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time. Below that, those entities do not exist. Inside time, we have space. Inside space, we have time. 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. So the speed of light is really the origin. It's really the null point or the reference point. Larson calls that the progression of the natural reference system. The universe is moving outward at the speed of light in all directions at all times. That's that initial progression. So this is a reference point. So when you make measurements, normally we think of making measurements from a 0 point. How far out is this, or how far is this from the 0 reference point? In Larson's system, we make our measurements from unit speed, the speed of light. Is this faster than the speed of light, or is this slower than the speed of light? The part of the universe that is slower than the speed of light is called the material sector, and this is what we're familiar with. And this is the universe that Einstein talks about when he says that the maximum speed of the universe is the speed of light. That is true from the material sector standpoint, but Einstein omitted the cosmic sector, which is the half of the universe that's actually moving faster than the speed of light. And in this cosmic universe, which Larson did write a book on metaphysics, and that cosmic universe is featured a lot in the metaphysical book. It references a lot of mental phenomena, life phenomena, and in this cosmic universe, the speed of light is the slowest speed in the universe. And even though the cosmic universe seems to be quite mysterious, it isn't, because it bears a perfect, natural, generalized reciprocal relation with the material universe. So whatever we know about the material universe can be extrapolated to the cosmic universe. And all we have to do is invert the roles of space and time, or time and space. So that's kind of how it works. We are in chapter 7 of his book that's called Nothing But Motion. It came out in 1979. It's primarily about physics. And we are in chapter 7, which is called high-speed motion. Now, high-speed motion generally refers to motions that are faster than the speed of light. And he was just giving us a few, he does a lot of his heavy lifting with visualizations, examples that he provides to help us kind of go through the kind of thinking that we need to go through so that we can kind of understand how the reciprocal system works. The reciprocal system is a system of theory, meaning that you can apply it to any subject that you want if you understand the system. It also means that he basically states that the reciprocal system of theory is quite simple. It seems complicated because you have to unlearn some stuff. But once you've unlearned the stuff, the new stuff that you learn is actually quite a bit simpler than the stuff that you unlearned. So, the relativity theory and the quantum mechanics that we generally, has generally, excluded 98% of us because it's too complicated for y'all, rubes out there. And just leave it to the guys in the white lab coats. We understand what's going on. That kind of stuff is way more complicated than the reciprocal system of theory. And the reciprocal system of theory is a replacement for that. So, but you'd have to unlearn the stuff before you learn new stuff. Okay, we're going to take over right here. Let Larson's words take over here in the middle of chapter 7. He was originally talking about discrepancies between the mathematical nature and the conceptual nature. He's saying that these exotic theories of Einstein and the quantum mechanists, they provide answers that are mathematically correct, but they are not conceptually correct. And so we've used them as a band-aid. Okay, they get the right answers, but they don't, give us the fundamental pictures of what's actually happening, because they don't provide us with any conceptual understanding of what's going on. And in fact, people like Heisenberg have actually even said that there is no conceptual thing going on. Just take it. Just sit down and take it. These are the answers we're coming up with. Don't bother with what those equations mean. Just plug the equations in, okay? So this is where Larson is right now. The significance of this kind of a discrepancy lies in the fact that when a theory makes certain assertions of a general nature, if any one case can be found where these assertions are not valid, this invalidates the generality of the assertions, and thus invalidates the theory as a whole. The inconsistency of this nature that we will consider here is what is known as the clock paradox. It is frequently confused with the twin paradox, in which one of a set of twins stays home while the other goes on a long journey at a very high speed. According to the theory, relativity, time progresses more slowly for the traveling twin, and he returns home still a young man, while his brother has reached old age. The clock paradox, which replaces the twins with two identical clocks, is somewhat simpler, as it evades the question as to the relation between clock registration and physical processes. In the usual statement of the paradox, it is assumed that clock B is accelerated relative to another identical clock A, and that subsequently, after a period of time at a constant relative velocity, the acceleration is reversed, and the clocks return to their original locations. According to the principles of special relativity, clock B, the moving clock, has been running more slowly than clock A, the stationary clock, and hence the time interval registered by B is less than that registered by A. But the special theory also tells us that we cannot distinguish between the motion of clock B relative to clock A and the motion of clock A relative to clock B. Thus, it is equally correct to say that A is the moving clock and B is the stationary clock. In which case the interval registered by clock A is less than that registered by clock B. Each clock therefore registers both more and less than the other. Now, that makes sense, but he plugs in what I know this to, the analogy that I'm familiar with here is the train paradox. If you're on a train, and there's another set of tracks right next to you and another train right next to you, and one of them starts moving, you can't tell the difference. You can't tell if your train is moving or if the other train is moving. And so I think that's what he's plugging in here with this clock paradox, is that with relativity, you can't tell the difference between the moving clock and the stationary clock. But at the same time, it's saying that one clock is moving faster than the other. So that is an absurdity paradox, and so that doesn't work. Okay, back to Larson. Here we have a situation in which a straightforward application of the special relativity theory leads to a conclusion that is manifestly absurd. This paradox, which stands squarely in the way of any claim that relativity theory is conceptually valid, has never been resolved except by means which contradict the basic assumptions of the relativity theory itself. Richard Schlegel brings this fact out very clearly in a discussion of the paradox in his book, Time and the Physical World. Quote, acceptance of a preferred coordinate system is necessary in order to resolve the contradiction, he points out. But, quote, such an assumption brings a profound modification to special relativity theory. For the assumption contradicts the principle that between any two relatively moving systems, the effects of motion are the same from either system to the other, end quote. J. Whitrow summarizes the situation in this way, quote, the crucial argument of those who support Einstein in the clock paradox controversy automatically undermines Einstein's own position, end quote. The theory, based primarily on the postulate that all motion is relative, contains an internal contradiction which cannot be removed except by some argument relying on the assumption that some motion is not relative. All of the efforts that have been made by the professional relativists to explain away this paradox depend, directly or indirectly, on abandoning the general applicability of the relativity principle and identifying the acceleration of clock B as something more than an acceleration relative to clock A. Moeller, for example, tells us that the acceleration of clock B is, quote, relative to the fixed stars, end quote. Authors such as Tolman, who speaks of the, quote, lack of symmetry between the treatment given to clock A, which was at no time subjected to any force, and that given to clock B, which was subjected to forces when the relative motion of the clocks was changed, are simply, end quote, are simply saying the same thing in a more roundabout way. But if motion is purely relative, as the special theory contends, then a force applied to clock B cannot produce anything more than a relative motion. It cannot produce a kind of motion that does not exist, and the effect on clock A must therefore be the same as that on clock B. Introduction of a preferred coordinate system, such as that defined by the average position of the fixed stars, gets around this difficulty, but only at the cost of destroying the foundations of the theory, as the special theory is built on the postulate that no such preferred coordinate system exists. The impossibility of resolving the contradiction inherent in the clock paradox by appeal to acceleration can be demonstrated in yet another way, as the acceleration can be eliminated without altering the contradiction that constitutes the paradox. No exhaustive search has been made to ascertain whether this streamlined version, which we may call the simplified clock paradox, has been given any consideration previously, but at any rate, it does not appear in the most accessible discussions of the subject. This is quite surprising, as it is a rather obvious way of tightening the paradox to the point where there is little, if any, room for an attempt at evasion. In this simplified clock paradox, we will merely assume that the two clocks are in uniform motion relative to each other. The question as to how this motion originated does not enter into the situation. Perhaps they have always been in relative motion, or if they were accelerated, they may have been accelerated equally. At any rate, for purposes of the inquiry, we are dealing only with the clocks in uniform relative motion. But here again, we encounter the same paradox. According to the relativity theory, each clock can be regarded either as stationary, in which case it is the faster, or as moving, in which case it is the slower. Again, each clock registers both more and less than the other. There are those who claim that the paradox has been resolved experimentally. In the published report of one recent experiment bearing on the subject, the flat assertion is made that, quote, these results provide an unambiguous empirical resolution of the famous clock paradox, end quote. This claim is, in itself, a good illustration of the lack of precision in current thinking in this area, as the clock paradox is a logical contradiction. It refers to a specific situation in which a strict application of the special theory of relativity results in absurdity. Obviously, a logical inconsistency cannot be resolved by empirical means. What the investigators have accomplished in this instance is simply to provide a further verification of some of the mathematical aspects of the theory which play no part in the clock paradox. Okay, we're going to leave it there for now. Take over tomorrow, go back into the clock paradox a little bit. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great day.